This segment is brought to you in part by the Canadian Historical Arms Society, owners of the Genesee Range, the premier recreational sport and training facility in Western Canada. See us online at historical-arms.com.
The Quiet Professional, a podcast about law enforcement, security, justice, and politics. We are digging deeper on the issues and going where the information takes us with access to experts and authorities. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Quiet Professional. Today, we're going to be talking about the importance of public policy and how it can get us back to building a stronger, more resilient Canada. I've got a great guest on here for this. I've got David Leis on the show. David is the president and CEO of the Frontier Centre for Public Policy. He has served in a variety of senior leadership roles within industry, government, First Nations, and education. And David undertook his master's in public policy at Queen's University. And last but not least, he is also a host of a podcast himself called Leaders on the Frontier. So I recommend people check that out. Welcome to the show, David.
Delightful to join you, Nathan.
Thanks for being here. I'll give a quick shout out to Scott McGregor, who you recently had on your show. An amazing conversation, by the way. But he was able to connect us and love the guy. He is a wealth of knowledge. So I was glad to see that you guys had a conversation. And I'll tell you this, a bunch of my coworkers listened to it as well. So a bunch of law enforcement, mind-blowing stuff. They really did appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. And it's great to make that connection through mutual friends. We really appreciate Scott a lot.
Yeah, he's been doing some really good stuff. And you guys too at the Frontier Centre.
Thank you.
Been reading some of the articles. Like I said, I recommend the podcast to people. It's kind of a breath of fresh air away from mainstream media, because I think there's more depth to some of these topics, and we got to explore that. And I find that you guys are doing a great job of that over there. So thank you again for that.
Really appreciate it.
Just to start the show, where we usually kind of start is talking about the guest. So can you give us a little bit more than what I read for the intro, a little profile on yourself, and maybe we'll get into or lead into what exactly the Frontier Centre is doing?
Well, the Frontier Centre is commonly known as a think tank. In other words, we're a unique community of researchers, people from a variety of backgrounds who really seek to advocate for common sense public policy that better serves Canadians. So we really are principled. We look at facts and evidence. We research them carefully. We want to get to, what is it called again? Oh yeah, the truth. Yeah. And we are not, easily dissuaded from looking at virtually every key public policy file in the country. We have an extraordinary network across Canada and around the world. And these are commonly known as experts, but a lot of them are people who are deeply committed to the principles that we stand for. Things such as how do you advocate for policy that will really build on the principles of, say, classical liberalism. A lot of the things that we take for granted, Nathan, are really ones that we've inherited from a previous generation. Things like, the desire for good governance and accountability, truth-seeking, subsidiarity, principles that empower citizens to have, to live their lives. So we really like and promote free markets and good governance, as well as kind of traditional rights and freedoms. And it's very all interrelated with culture. Many of them owe their origins to Judeo-Christian values. Things like equal treatment under the law, to proper justice, not social justice. No, that's something different. We don't like those ideologies, which we think are really putting the world upside down. But we think the pathway to both prosperity and freedom is by honoring the individual rights and freedom, the respect for every individual, the idea that they're an image bearer of the divine, and that we need to be able to appreciate that and promote that vision. So we're one of the very few voices, Nathan, I would say, in the country that are actively doing that. We don't accept any government money. It's all through the generosity of people. But That's essentially what we do at Frontier, and we offer a ton of solutions and roadmaps, and we relate to a ton of governments. But we are truly citizens on the move, and we have great courage. We're regularly criticized and critiqued. We also get a lot of accolades, but I tell you, it's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, certainly the work you're doing is not for the faint of heart. I like some of the terminology you're using in there. Actually, one of the things that one of the recent guests I had on here was Adam Swart, and he works he's the founder of a company called Crowds on Demand. But a lot of our conversation kind of centered around advocacy, and that's something you brought up there. And I never really thought of that term a whole lot in my career, but once we were talking about and the way he described it, I really started to kind of think, I do this every day, and especially at a management level. I have a team of 8 people I work with, and you're always advocating for them. You want to get them opportunities, or you want to get them some training, but
Mhm.
then I've been doing it for myself all this time, but I never really put a word to it. So I think that's kind of interesting that you bring that up, and it seems to be a theme, a recurring theme.
Mhm.
One of the things we talked about was just how important it is, for yourself, but also for you to be able to do it for others. And I see
Mhm.
that in some of the work that you guys are doing. One of the things I did want to ask on that, though, and just with what you've said, is so for the Frontier Center, the think tank, they're not necessarily considered a liberal think tank or a conservative think tank.
Mhm.
Like you said, you're more focused on the facts. You take all this stuff in, and then you give the information out. Um, is that a correct way to describe it?
I think in general terms, yes. I mean, we are nonpartisan. We never, ever advocate for people to vote a certain way. We are passionate advocates, though, for principles
Hmm.
that empower individuals to run their lives.
Yeah.
So we would have the vision of limited government, a sound respect for individual rights and freedom. So, in other words, we are not communists. We are not advocates that the state controls everything, which in many respects is the path that we're currently on,
Hmm.
to put it bluntly. And we would be advocates then for those principles. And this is why we're a charity. We are there to serve Canadians. We're not there to serve ourselves as special interests. I mean, so when you use the word advocacy, advocacy can be used by many special interests that they wish to lobby, advocate for their own interests, but that may actually do great harm to Canadians. So we are, well, just not very common because there's lots of public policy that has been, um, to put it bluntly, corrupted
Hmm.
by special interests who advocate for their narrow interests. They're not advocating for the Canadian tradition or the principles that have enabled Canada to become one of the most successful, prosperous nations in the world. All of that now is on the table because we do not have a strong, um, I would say, leadership posture that serves Canadians. Much of leadership today, I would humbly suggest, is about it's self-serving leadership. It's not about serving
Yeah,
Canada.
yeah. We're definitely going to get into current events and all
Mhm.
those topics. One thing, just before we go too far into this, uh, we kind of skipped talking just a bit about you. I wonder, how did you get into the position you're in today? So what kind of drew you into talking about public policy in the first place?
Well, I suppose it's in one's DNA. I have always been passionately interested in our country in terms of its history, its significance. I come from a long generation of families, goes back some 7 generations. Um, I have always appreciated my family a lot, so it was really the modeling of my parents and others in our larger family that served in many capacities near and far, and paid big prices as well.
Hmm.
And so I've always appreciated thinking about all kinds of subject areas. I went through school, had extraordinary teachers, and went through quickly. And I've always appreciated being involved. So I was elected at a young age. I think I was the youngest mayor in Canada. I've been involved in the private sector and government and education. I've taught different courses
Hmm.
in different studies, both universities and polytechnics. And so it's to me, it's the intersection of all these things that have made it apparent to me that we have an incredible country, but we take it for granted. And I would say it's in deep trouble. And so we need to think, well, what can we do to help move the country forward? And I think this is a unique mission. That's what motivates me, Nathan. It's
Yeah.
really the opportunity to make a difference because I know this sounds really cheesy, but I do want a future for the next generation, and I don't think they have one right now.
Well, no, but that's, you know what, that's a good point. And if we're not working for the next generation, then what are we doing at all, really?
Mhm. Yeah,
If we're not setting things up for people down the road, then I mean, there's not really any point to
exactly.
doing a whole lot of it.
Well, people don't realize that there were many, many generations before us. They gave us a grand inheritance of these traditions and freedoms, this prosperity. Think of it that the founding of this country, I mean, we just experienced, what is it called? A Canada Day. And many Canadians don't realize how extraordinarily precious and unique that feat was to basically bring Western civilization to this part of the continent. And I'm not saying that there weren't other civilizations as well that we had to work with. Of course we did. But by and large, this is a kind of a cold, unforgiving kind of climate. And to be able to, with recent technology, really over the last 150, 200 years, be able to make the country that it is today is really an extraordinary accomplishment. And if you can't see that, then you need to open your eyes.
Yeah. One of the things I'm wondering too is for yourself, because of the topics that you do take on, one, were you kind of prepared for that? You know, going through all your experiences and the jobs that you have had,
Mm,
were you ready for the critique and criticisms that were going to come with that? Maybe stuff today is at a slightly higher level than what people might want or might have expected
mhm,
because it can get very divisive. Some of it has turned violent, you see, like in politics, some of the
mhm,
stuff's gone pretty crazy. So I'm just wondering, like, for yourself, is that something that you were able to kind of prepare yourself for, you prepare your mind
mhm,
for, and you know, how do you handle those type of things?
mhm. Well, in my world, I get around 20 to 30,000 letters a month. I have an awful lot of people that are incredibly supportive. There's a lot of positive feedback, and there's all kinds of communications with other members of our larger team. And so I think I feel very encouraged. In fact, it gives me a lot of hope that people are kind of renewing and waking up to things. In my humble opinion, I also get some other more threatening types of communications, and it's not new. It is concerning, but I think that there's various precautions you can take. Like when I was an elected official, from time to time, I would get very threatening things. But generally, that was a very, very positive experience as well. I just think there's a
Mm,
lot of incredible, wonderful Canadians, but there are some bad actors,
yeah.
and one can't be naive to that. So I don't know what the full answer is, other than to keep one's eyes open and do basic precautionary measures. But I think that ultimately, if our country is worth it, then you've got to ask yourself, is that not a small price to pay to be able to be part of that solution? And I would say that what bothers me even more is people that are silent and not engaged, not really doing anything.
Yeah.
They are truly part of the problem. And I would think, there's all kinds of people, and I'm paraphrasing a number of parties, including Martin Luther King Jr. and others, that would say that the real problem is when not just so much the evil people, it's when the good people are silent.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The it's one thing that I always bring up at work, right? I'm in law enforcement. I'm always trying to get people motivated and more
Hmm.
engaged. I even think back to just our recent election. This kind of, I guess, flows nicely into what we're going to talk about our current environment. So recent provincial elections, federal elections, and one of the things I ask the members that I work with, because you'll hear them with their general chit chat, just kind of talking politics. Like every time I've asked this now, have you even read their platform,
Mm,
whichever party it is?
yeah.
And nobody ever has, ever. I've
No
never
kidding.
found a single person who has. So it's like, how do you even know what you're talking about, right?
Mhm,
Like you're just kind of regurgitating some
mhm.
headlines, whatever you might see in the news. But I mean, like, go to the people, go to these people and see what their party says
Yeah.
in their own words, because that's how you hold them to account, right? It's like,
Mhm,
you wrote this. This is what you said you were going to do. So it's just kind of interesting. Like, I think in our current environment, there is a huge gap in just people really trying to truly understand these things.
mhm,
There's a lack of discourse. There's no
mhm,
debate anymore.
mhm,
You know, like you see all the with the politicians, a lot of the times they won't show up for debates. You're like,
mhm,
that should just be mandatory.
mhm.
So it's just kind of interesting. So I kind of want to get your take on like current environment, Canada. Where is it at? You know, is it going in a good direction, a bad direction, or is it just things need that we just have things we need to work on like everybody
Mhm,
else?
mhm. Well, it's generally in a Canada's in a very challenging situation. If we did a kind of a 360 review, we could look at this from many angles. Economically, it's stagnated the last some 12 years. That's very evident based on stat after stat. I mean, our per capita GDP is anemic as other countries like the United States continue to move forward. We are not a place of investment capital. So, economically, that's a problem. There's all kinds of signs of our institutions really being not executing their missions as they were designed to,
Hmm.
whether it's in education. I mean, you look at universities today in so many faculties, and I've seen this up close. Many of the professors themselves are self described Marxists. Um, study after study has shown that. We have a situation where there's all kinds of institutions that are not really serving our country anymore. I think justice is is obviously multifaceted. Whether you look at movements to defund the police, whether you've got movements that are really inverting the law from the kind of the common law, which is kind of an element of the DNA of freedom built in
Hmm.
it in terms of precedent. That's been moved towards in law schools towards the living tree idea that judges should be superseding elected decision makers. The 1982 Constitution was a disaster, among other things, that really enforced that movement towards the power of judges. That I would argue um, really has done great harm to the elected institutions like parliaments, legislative assemblies.
You see that as kind of like a genesis point, like a flash point of where things started going in
Yeah,
a certain direction.
definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, very much so. And I know that as a many years ago, doing an analysis about the charters and the risks associated with it, and all that has panned out to be true on all kinds of fronts. So if you do that kind of 360 scan, and I could go through all kinds of areas, Canada is regressed. It's not progressed. I would suggest, and the proof is in the pudding. It's not about rhetoric or press releases. It's about the results. And if you look at our economy, um, areas related to really moving forward our standard of living, we've got a big challenge, but we also have great opportunities. So I don't want there to be, I'm trying to be straight up,
Yeah.
Nathan, in terms of answering your question. I don't want there to be any doubt with your kind audience in terms of where this country's at. But that begs the issue: what are the solutions? And I know that we're going to talk about that, but ultimately, our country, all these things reflect deeper issues. They're symptoms, if you will, of a way of thinking. And what's happened in Canada is that we have a lot of passive citizens. We have a lot of people that the information from the media, if you think of the so-called fourth estate, a high functioning society, if you're going to answer the question, how do you govern, right? Every society in human history ultimately has to answer the question, how are we going to self-govern? And some have chosen the answer, well, we're going to take the strongest bully in town and they will run the show. And others have said, well, no, we'll let an elite, the great anointed, to run the show, an aristocracy, if you will. And we're kind of in a very unusual culture because most, if you look carefully, most parties in the world are really serfs or slaves. So in our case, we really have this unique tradition. It goes back some, approximately 1,000 years. If you look at Magna Carta, that's what was that, 820 years ago. There's all kinds of measures that we said, no, we want the people to have as much freedom and rights as possible. And these are the rules by which we're going to do that. So Canada is kind of flipping itself away from that tradition, I would argue.
So who would, with where we are now, who would guide us first? Like, does this come down to just the politicians? Is it the elite class? Is it like a group of billionaires that run things? And
Mm.
who is the leader out there that really
Mhm.
people need to start looking to and then
Mhm.
going to them, but also holding them accountable? I mean,
Mhm.
there has to be some accountability, which I feel like we haven't really seen in quite some time.
Mhm.
But who do we go to, and are they even doing this job that they're supposed to be doing?
Mhm. Boy, that's a great question because ultimately there's a number of answers, but they really boil down to this, in my humble opinion, is it's found within a particular type of cultural institutional revolution that's happened within our own societies. Going back to, and I think you can trace this very well back to the 60s, 70s, where we um, there were good movements when you look back at this to basically empower even more citizens. But there were also other parts of that cultural revolution that were really juxtaposed to those kinds of traditional values that we would be advocates for. So, for example, there's always been advocates for socialism, the idea that in
Mhm.
order to create a more caring society, the state should control everything. And that has always proven to be a disaster. Look at history around the world. So that has been a steady incremental, you could even argue a fast incrementalism, where the state, the more they control, the more that's impacted negatively our culture. So if you think of dependency on the state to the politicization of all kinds of files in a way that actually doesn't serve Canadians, but they're very good at rhetoric that tries to suggest that it is. So in fact, um, that has been those are kind of key points where over that period of time, if you look at the percentage of the GDP that comes from government has radically increased. If you look at the amount of taxation, right, the
Mhm.
average family or Canadian remits almost half of their income to government. Now, the qualification is that 40% of Canadians don't pay any tax. They're actually net beneficiaries. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. So you have many Canadians that are paying more than half their income to government, and that's by any estimation far too high. So we need radical tax reform to reset that. But that has an impact on our culture and our perception that the solution is not myself and my responsibility to look after myself or to help others, right? That kind of tradition is being put aside because you have a state that's kind of pushed out everything and made smaller citizens. With a big state comes smaller
So
citizens.
is that like kind of like removing the agency though from the people? Like, so when
Indeed. Yes.
I feel
Mhm.
like that's the biggest culture shift is people don't feel responsible for themselves in a lot of
Yeah.
ways.
That's
And
right, Nathan.
yeah.
And in that respect, in many ways, we're perpetual teenagers.
Yeah.
We're not growing up as adults. You want to empower citizens to make their decisions, to live their dreams, to be able to move forward, and that requires also being an adult and also experiencing the consequences of their decisions. So if the state's always inserting itself in someone's life, then you take away their ability to move forward and grow up. Now, I'm not saying that we don't have care and compassion. Of course we do. But this has gone haywire. The pendulum has swung so far to the left where the state is, this is the de facto age of we're moving towards a kind of a unique socialist model, and even where the state controls many measures of private capital. And I can give you many examples of that. So this is a place where the other side believes that they are the good and the great. Those people that are in control or decision makers, many of them believe they control your rights and they have the prerogative because they know what's best, because they believe they're so smart and intelligent that their prerogative is to control your life. This is totally not in keeping with our Canadian tradition. And of rights and freedoms. I mean, it's just totally
Yeah.
putting it upside down. And this is what people, I think, often don't understand.
Even on
Yeah.
that, I kind of think, who would want that responsibility? I don't want to tell people what to do in their life. I don't want to
Mhm.
have to be responsible for everyone else's life.
Yeah.
I have a
Mhm.
family. That's
Right.
enough. I don't, yeah, I'm dealing
No,
with
I,
them.
I agree. It's a big job to be a
Yeah.
great dad or a great husband, whatever role you have. And that's where most Canadians, I think, are kind of on that page that you've just articulated, Nathan. They think that, it's kind of those traditional, proven ways of relating to each other that offer the most opportunity. But there is a minority, I would call them, I would dare say many of them are a minority, that are power brokers. They believe that they are entitled to run your life. They have taken that's a radically different philosophy than what Canadian society is used to. But this has happened not just recently; it's happened over decades. I would argue.
Yeah. What do you think comes first when kind of in this discussion? Is it the politics and their strategy, or is it the culture? And then, one directs the other.
Mhm.
Is it, or they happen at the same time? And it's just kind of a ecosystem where we,
Mm.
just
Mhm.
it's constant influence back and forth.
Yeah, I think it is back and forth. It's iterative, but in a particular way. There's example after example where culture is not organic, it is intentional.
Okay.
So culture being kind of the ways and behaviors that we treat each other. And so those in the role of leadership, I would argue, have an obligation to be very mindful of the culture that they're creating in society. So for example,
Could
traditions.
I ask on that though?
Yes.
Well, maybe even on that though, when you talk about the created one, the first thing that popped into my head was everything that starts with anti before it, because it's never good enough to, like, racism. It's not good enough
Mhm.
to be not racist. And,
Yeah.
you know, you have to be anti racist. So now you have to do something about all these things out there. So
Mhm.
you put that word in front of things. Now people are trying to compel you, make you take certain actions, whether you agree with it or not.
Yeah, that's right. So that kind of language and language matters are being driven by series or ways of thinking, and there's very clear roots or fountainheads for this way of thinking. A common one is, of course, in the bowels of these universities, in many different faculties. Not all, but most of them have adopted a particular type of oppressor versus victim narrative that really reflects a kind of intertwined philosophies, but really, for lack of a better term, cultural Marxism. And because economic Marxism was um, utterly absurd and did not work, um, the Marxists regrouped, and part of that regeneration, it came through different centers, but one of them was, of course, the Frankfurt School, which unfortunately I had to study for many years. um, Advocated these ways of thinking, and so they saw culture as the weapon, the
Mm,
catalyst to drive change, because they understood well, like many do not necessarily fully appreciate. In all defense to our libertarian friends, um, they understood well, if you can frame up the culture through particular methodologies, whether it's forms of propaganda, there's a whole myriad of methods and tactics they use. You can shift the culture, and in doing so, shift the associated public policy. And a lot of this is not just simply through the mind, it's not through rational discourse, it's actually through use of emotion and
yeah.
other related methods to change the culture. And some have coined this the so-called Overton window, in the sense that you've got culture that surrounds what you can make possible within policy, and that window represents the bounds in which you can, quote, talk about any particular policy issue. Like, so for example, in Canada, we have a very archaic view of healthcare. We think it should be, in acute care at least, more of a public monopoly. And somehow that is a good public good. And the way we deliver it is the be end all. And in fact, at every measure, we're the second most expensive system in the world. We have long waiting lists. Some 70 people die every day on waiting lists. Um, and it's not to say there aren't a lot of good people in healthcare. There are, but the system is totally ill-conceived and ill-designed, that it's ranked really at the bottom of OECD countries.
Even on that, and maybe I'll add to that point, if I'm saying this correctly, I heard recently someone was having a conversation about this, about healthcare delivery in Alberta, and we've had in the news people have died in waiting rooms, and then it's a whole thing
Yeah,
about
that's right.
Alberta's terrible, they're making cuts, and the structure they use
Mhm.
is terrible. The same thing happens in Manitoba, where it's an
Mm.
NDP government,
That's right.
and I remember being a part of this conversation. I go, it looks to me like we just don't do it right anywhere. So maybe it's the
Yeah, you're
it's the
right. Yeah.
whole program, it's the whole system. You need
Mhm.
to rethink it, but healthcare is almost like an infallible
Mhm.
thing in Canadians'
Yeah,
minds.
that's
So,
right. It's like a sacred cow.
yeah.
It's seen as something you don't dare question, and that's been intentionally orchestrated by the series of special interests that want to see the status quo continue, even though people are
Mhm.
dying, and it's a low performing system. And there's great solutions. I mean, and to the credit of the Alberta government, they are working at trying to change it and empower people with choice. I mean, the last time I checked, Nathan, it's your body, is it not?
Yeah.
It's my body, my body. So this is almost an absurd situation again, where it takes great audacity at many different levels to say that somehow we have a right to control everything. No, I'm not arguing that we shouldn't have a publicly funded healthcare system, but the money shouldn't go to the institution, to their general budget. It should go and follow the procedure. That's what they do in Sweden. They do that in France, Germany, all kinds of other countries. But if Canadians could just simply understand and see those other options, that would be a real breakthrough because we can do better. We really can. And so politicians are caught in that window that is orchestrated through a combination of culture and certain political power of different special interest groups that desperately want to keep the status quo, even though people are dying. And it's kind of outrageous when you think of it. So we're one of the very, very, very few voices that speak up about that because the current system is not serving Canadians well. And there's so many great examples around the world that would just blow people away, and that's exciting. So we want to convey that vision.
So, do you think, and just kind of going back to something we were talking about just before the healthcare kind of focus, do you think Canadians have just been like lulled into sleep with the change in culture? Like it's a very slow drip.
Mm,
Whoever it is, whether it's foreign interference or it's special interest groups or
mhm,
political parties that are slowly changing this culture that we're involved with. Is it the long game? Is that what they're doing? It's a bunch of long ball, and
yes. Mhm,
they I just kind of look at it like whoever's deciding to do this or wants these changes or wants to
mhm,
push us in this direction, they've got a very long view of things and they can wait, because a
mhm,
lot of people, that's kind of their problem is, we think in 4-year election cycles, things are like very
mhm,
fast nowadays, everything's
mm,
turning over. But if someone can play that long game, I think we're kind of blind to it.
mhm,
And, we're just lulled into a new reality, a new world,
mhm,
whatever it might be.
mhm. No, absolutely. It's a long game. I can show you the frameworks for this thinking that go back a long, long time. I think of what was it, 19 the missus from prison from Antonio Gramsci,
Mm.
from 19 was it 1928. Unfortunately, I had to read those original papers as well as so many others. I think of the musings of. I'm making some references, so in case people want to dive into this, they can do that. Like Herbert Marcuse, Theodore Adorno, people from the Frankfurt School. This was the frameworks were lined up decades ago, and they saw education as the primary deliverer of this parasitical mind virus. To genuflect to my friend Gad Sad.
Mhm.
But this is the situation that this has been the long game, as you say, Nathan. It's been a marathon through these institutions, and it's been very intentional. And so if Canadians are in the belief that somehow the government has their back, they are sadly mistaken. This is a time to look critically at what is going on and to wake up and act accordingly. This means that, for instance, if your child goes to a public school, you need to understand what they're being taught. And in fact, why would you send your child to a public school today? I can't think of any good reason. So there are solutions. Again, the money should not go to the institution of woke administrators. You need to, the government needs to send the credit. I mean, it's all your money, anyways,
Yeah.
to the parents so that they can do charter schools like they do in Alberta, or better yet, create a school voucher system. You've got to destroy public monopolies. They are not healthy. They serve themselves ultimately. And Canada is riddled with public monopolies. And that's not only the story of our productivity problems, as our standard of living is about half of what it is in the United States, but it is the story of our culture. We believe that government is our savior, and that is just an utterly asinine assumption.
You mentioned critical thinking, and that's something that I think is largely missing from nowadays, especially with you get the Twitterverse and the screaming online and
Yes.
the stuff. And who knows if even 90% of that is real people, could just be bots. So
Mhm.
it's very hard environment to, I think, permit critical thinking anymore,
Mhm.
and to have those good debates. To kind of go back to what we were
Mhm.
saying earlier,
Mhm.
maybe if we look at some solutions, just with the
Mhm.
time that we do have left, what do you see as some potential solutions? So if we have these issues and they've been long running, long standing things, but again, it's kind of subversive, like the change in culture, some of the issues around politics, I don't think the solutions are going to occur overnight.
Mhm. Mhm.
That would be a little too optimistic. But I think we could be hopeful that we can turn things around.
Mhm.
But kind of even going back to what we were saying earlier, like who are the people who can lead that? Do we have a unifier? Do we have
Mhm.
a true leader in the sense of the word, not
Mhm.
just managers? Where can we look to, one, find solutions, and then two, maybe restore some of that agency for people themselves,
Mhm.
make them accountable to themselves?
There's many solutions, Nathan, and I'm very
That's good to
excited
hear.
about that. There's no, absolutely. Canada, to be clear, Canada should be the wealthiest, freest nation in the world. There's absolutely no question about it. We have just about everything going for us, but we do have some significant challenges that we need to be clear-eyed about and turn around. So when it comes to leadership, the quick answer is you and me. Everybody else are going to turn this around. And it begins with an awareness of your own thinking capability. I know that I'm maybe unique, but at my dinner table growing up as a kid, my parents taught us about logical fallacies. It was very clear.
Mm.
Things like, what are they again? Oh, yeah, ad hominem attacks. That's the oldest logical fallacy of them all. You don't deal respectfully, Nathan, around the argument like you're doing. I mean, to your credit, you're doing leadership, man. Like you're doing this kind of conversation to get people better informed, to be able to learn. And so, bravo on you, because that's the basis then for action in our own lives, whether it's being a good citizen, right? Citizenship involves, let's go through some solutions. Citizenship, we need to celebrate our history. We need to know our history. Have you read a history book about Canada? Like some of Pierre Burton's book about, say, the last spike, building the transcontinental railway is just unbelievably audacious. The stories are legendary.
And who does a good one on this was Dr. Cook. He was with the Canadian War Museum. So
Yeah.
in one of the books I was reading in preparation for a podcast I did,
Mhm.
uh, it talks about how we talk about our history. But it was a
Right.
very interesting comparison looking at the UK and the US,
Mhm. Yeah.
and just talking about how, I'll use the US as like the most extreme example.
Mm.
They're making movies, they're saying they're kicking ass,
Right.
they're like
Mhm.
celebrating
Yeah.
everything.
Right on.
Canada was the complete opposite. We didn't want to tell our stories, or when we
Mhm.
did, it was
Mhm.
very dark and
Mhm.
very sad. And then
Mhm.
that just we kind of divert from
Yeah.
there, and now you see the differences between
Right.
us and our
Well,
neighbors.
I think there's enormous Canadian historical resources
Hmm.
that we can take advantage of. Just really incredible books. Pierre Burton's series. Pick them
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
Um, I also lived this through, family associations. I had a great uncle who got an incredible medal for helping to involve in the development of their national radar system in the UK. And it
Hmm.
was all totally secret. But if they hadn't done that, World War II would have ended entirely differently. There are incredible heroes that built this country and what we have today. People need to get on with it and teach their kids that information.
Yes.
Teach your kids about how to think, how to appreciate every day. And a lot of this comes out of, again, principles, in my case, of values of faith. I'm not saying you have to believe a certain way. No, it's the principles that enable us to think critically about getting to facts and information. If you hear some kind of news broadcast that's constantly berating some person based on, well, it's not really based on facts or information, but it's always, kind of cleverly done as a swipe around people, then
Mm.
that's not a good information source. So find your information sources. The media, the problem in Canada is that we have some 2,000 media outlets that are funded now by the federal government, and they all have to sign
Oh,
an
really?
agreement that they have to cover a lot of things in a particular way, from quote reconciliation, whatever that means,
Hmm.
to DEI, to climate alarmism. Those are things that we need to be able to recognize. So our citizenship matters, not just simply our rights and freedoms and recognizing what they are, but our responsibilities. And shame on any Canadian that doesn't understand their responsibility to engage, let alone vote and volunteer and to get involved in their community. So I'm really excited about, I think, a lot of renewals happening in our country as people wake up to the things that they need to do. Just one example, think of the sovereignty movement in Alberta. Now, you may not agree with pursuing sovereignty outside of our country, but what I like about it is it's creating a debate to renew our federation. Time after time, our government in Ottawa doesn't follow the Constitution. They're constantly shoving their fingers into the affairs of
Hmm.
provincial governments. This is one of the reasons why we're in deep trouble when it comes to, say, security, because the federal government hasn't done its job as a NATO partner. Everybody knows that we're a bunch of freeloaders mooching off our partners, including the United States. No wonder the United States has said, no, enough of this.
Yeah.
So let's get on with that renewal. In every policy area that we're involved with, I think we have really extraordinary solutions because they're based on proven examples that have worked across the country. So let's just go to the basics. Nathan, we don't even have internal trade in Canada among
Hmm.
provinces. That's worth, depending on the analysis, at least 4 to 7 points per GDP.
Wasn't there more barriers between provinces than there was between Canada, US? Feel like I read
Yes,
that somewhere.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have free trade in Canada. How dumb is that?
Yeah.
So if you think that somehow it's all about Orange Man bad in the White House, no. The opportunity is not only to trade with the United States and negotiate a good deal for us, but it's ourselves. Everybody knows that Canada, by and large, not entirely, is a bad place to do business. There's a lot of people. This is why so much capital has left the country.
And I would say even on the whole Trump thing, I think he just becomes a very convenient excuse in a lot of ways. And right now, especially from the law enforcement side and all the
Right.
arguments over fentanyl and things
Yeah.
like, I'll tell you right now, on the law enforcement side, we don't do a lot of good stuff in with what they're talking about when it comes to the transnational crime,
Mm.
the
Yeah.
major organized crime and drug trafficking. Like,
Right.
they're good individuals. Our organizations have failed in a lot of ways. And
Mhm.
the Americans have picked up the slack in a lot of it and have helped
Exactly.
us in a
Yeah.
lot of it. But, you know, also we get this convenient excuse, somebody to blame and, elbows up and all that
Mhm.
rhetoric comes out. And it's like, that doesn't actually help anybody. So,
You're right,
you know,
Nathan.
look to the people that are responsible for us. Again, back to the agency part and the accountability. And, we need to be looking at, have a little self reflection and a little bit more
Mhm.
humility. I think would go a long way in all of this.
You're absolutely, Nathan. I think that's a very powerful example. Let's get on with doing our jobs. Let's support law enforcement to enforce the law. And in a lot of cases, and Scott McGregor and so many others at Frontier have spoken eloquently about the need to be able to deport the bad guys. We don't deport the bad guys. There's a lot of criminals in Canada. We're seen as largely a safe haven
Yeah.
for bad actors. Anybody in law enforcement knows this to be true.
Yeah.
And we have a bad situation when we have all kinds of a significant high production labs producing really bad stuff. And it's not just simply for Canadians. No, it's for export.
Yes.
And we know our ports of entry are civs by and large, not all. But if you look at the Port of Vancouver, gosh, open your eyes. I mean, we scan probably for explosive devices, maybe 1-2%.
Someone was telling me the other day, as I'll say, it's a good source, but
Mhm.
I think it was in the news that we scan like 1 or 2%, but
That's it.
apparently they only say that because they can't say zero.
Yeah.
But it's
Well,
actually like less than 1%, and they just
yeah,
rounded it up.
that's right. And I qualify my remarks and say I don't mean to denigrate anybody who's running the port or things like that. I know people are doing their best, but this should be a red alert
Yes.
on all fronts to get with the program and do our jobs well. So let's go for it. Um, what about the war that we've had on the federal level and some other provinces? The war on our largest industry, namely oil and gas in this country. I mean, that
Mhm.
has done so much damage to not only Canadians and their standard of living as it goes and declines, but it has done enormous damage to a world that need oil and gas. They need good energy to be able to move forward. I mean, that is just foundational to our society. So, let's get on with the program. Now, there's been a lot of talk about pipelines. I'll see it to believe it. It's not, again, about the rhetoric and media releases, it's about results.
Yes.
And so, let's pay attention. Let's get on with comprehensive tax reform. Let's enable us to hold on to our entrepreneurial class. There's a lot of Canadians that are ambivalent about um, success. I mean, you even have some people that are trying to sign a petition to get rid of Elon Musk's Canadian passport. How absurd is that, right? When you pursue politics of envy and hate over politics of celebrating success.
Well, that's the thing. I don't wake up every day and worry about how much money some other person has or what car
Mhm.
they have. I'm worried about my own life, and I'm happy with my own life and
Yeah,
comfortable with how much I make and the
right
things
on.
I can do, and that
Yeah,
I forward my family. It's like to wake up and just be spiteful to other
Mhm.
people. Seems like a
Exactly.
very hard job.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so Nathan, that's a great attitude, and I would suspect most Canadians would agree with that. But
Mm.
there's a vocal minority, and the media kind of play along with it as well. That love the politics of envy. There's all kinds of assets that we have in this country. They're known as crown corporations that could easily be privatized. They're not performing. We've done all kinds of financial analysis on those crown corporations. Almost every single one of them. In fact, to be frank, I can't think of one that is. They're not paying taxes, and they all adopt a culture that they're working for the government. They've all become politicized. Almost
Yeah.
all of them. There are exceptions. So we should be doing that. We should really get on with rebuilding our military and law enforcement. We know that we don't really know who's in the Arctic. That's a problem, and we need to renew our national identity, our civic culture,
Hmm.
citizenship. We need to reform the Canadian Health Act. We need to reform Aboriginal relations to get beyond the Indian Act that's really paternalistic. We need to empower every Canadian, including Aboriginal Canadians, to be prosperous, to live the Canadian dream. And so I think Canada can really get on with it. And one of the major concerns I have right now, Nathan, is that, and this is a file that we're very much on, is property rights are being further undermined, and those are now in doubt given the kind of land claim changes um, and legal precedent at Cowichan, Musqueam. There's a whole series of them that you can read it on our website. But these are clear and present dangers. If we don't have property rights, we're done as a country. We're not investable.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think these are all very important topics that people really do need to dive into. Because, I think a lot of people say, it's just, it doesn't affect me day to day. It's like, well, it does in a lot of ways because your tax dollars pay for a lot of things that are going on. But if it doesn't affect you now, it could very well in the future. So you got to be a little bit up to speed. I got to be a scholar in it,
Yeah.
but you definitely want to be paying attention to some things. So,
No, absolutely, Nathan. I mean, I think that, you know law enforcement from different angles. I mean, I think that one of the things that I was so excited about from my own experience in that area was the philosophy of Sir Robert Peel and community-based policing, to be citizens who are partners in that area. And I think that what concerns me is a lot of these ideologies that are taught systematically in our schools, our universities in particular, really seek to demonize people in law enforcement. They seek to demonize people who are of another color. I mean, we're shifting from individual rights to group rights based on superficial things that have nothing to do with the quality of our character or our conduct. And that is, I think, incredibly harmful. And that will destroy our country, because our country's always been about individual rights and freedoms. We don't care. I mean, when you think of Sir John A. Macdonald, and if you read some of the founding debates of this country, they are inspiring, as they advocated a vision that no matter where you came from, it didn't matter what your race was, you could come here and build a life of freedom and live a Canadian dream. And that's exactly what they did.
yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up and a good note to leave it on. Just a very last thing, I want to make sure, give you a second here to just say, where can people follow you, find you, the work that you're doing, and the podcast?
Well, Nathan, you can find our center's website at fcpp.org. And lots of great things. Sign up for the newsletter. There's all kinds of great reports and information, including one that were just released this past week on housing affordability. It's kind of one of the premier ones in the world. And then you can also look up on Leaders on the Frontier. You can see it not only on YouTube on that channel, but you can also find it on different cable networks across the country. And so I just want to encourage all your audience to get engaged. And I want to commend you, Nathan, for your leadership and your work in terms of what you're doing today. I think it's very, very important.
I appreciate that. It was no easy task getting this started, especially being current serving law enforcement. But it's been a blessing, and honestly, it's helped so many people. Kind of like you said. I mean, you get the negative, but there's so much more positive, and the positive is so much more of a high that you just kind of keep forging ahead. So
yeah, well, and good for you, Nathan, because it's not just yourself, but also your colleagues, your community around you that I understand in conversation with you that have been supportive. And I think that that really excites me, because it says that people are paying attention as a team to be intentional about trying to share information and practices. Those are the grand traditions that we've inherited, and we can't take them for granted.
Yes, I agree. Thank you, Dave, for being on the show. I said I'd get you out by the top of the hour, so we are just there, squeaking you out of here in time.
Really appreciate it.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening in and following along with the discussions. Be sure to click the follow or subscribe button on your respective listening platform. Also, check out the Quiet Professional on X and Instagram under TQP780. And most importantly, please share where you can. Everyone has a part to play in getting these education and information pieces out there, so pass it along. Thanks again.